Hey, welcome back and welcome to another episode of a Stronger Futures Project, where the idea behind this is to discover what we don't know that we don't know, and maybe even some of the things that we're doing and practicing, and we're not even aware of it. And it's becoming aware of what it is that we're doing. I'm your host, Stanley Dietrich with 360 Life Without Limits. And I'm joined today again with my co host, Tracy Borson. Welcome, Tracy. And how was your vacation?
It was so good. And it's really interesting. I'm excited to talk about the power of questions today because there were a lot of questions that we experienced on vacation and I think there's just a lot of questions in our day-to-day life that sometimes we ask, sometimes stay as thoughts. Sometimes other people tell us not to ask. So I'm really excited to kind of I think a lot of times we assume we go away on vacation and it's just like everything is perfect and everything is relaxing and we don't wonder things or we don't have things that we need to ask about. But I mean, we traveled to Europe and we were in 3 different countries that do not speak primarily English, and there was a lot. There was a lot of questions. So I'm excited to bring that to the conversation today.
So, on your vacation, you went with a group of people or you went with an isolated, like close knit,
I went
just
with my family. So my husband, my 6-year-old son, and my mother-in-law.
okay. All right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah. It was
Okay.
the first time I went on a month-long vacation, and someone posted on LinkedIn the other day that if you can take a month off from your business, then you've won at life. And I was like, okay, great. I took a month off. Good job,
Good.
me.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm going to say don't quit. Even if you won, don't quit. Keep going.
No, yes,
Um,
I believe in that too.
So, did you discover, and I'm going to go personal first. Did you discover anything about you on this trip with your intimate, close family?
I did, and not just one thing. So there's one thing that stands out to me. So we actually were away for my birthday, and 2 years ago, I started like owning my birthday. Right,
Okay.
it's my day, and I'm going to do what I want. And so when I'm at home, I am very familiar with the things that I want to do. I want to go and have sushi for lunch. I want to go and have a pedicure. I want to go and have coffee with my sister. I want to like so that I'm very familiar with the things I want to do and how to do them. Right? How whether or not I need to book them in advance, how long it's going to take to commute to the places, and all things. And so this year, I was like, oh, we're going to be in Italy for my birthday. And my brain was just like, we can have spaghetti carbonara and wine for dinner. Because my brain said I can find spaghetti carbonara and wine anywhere in Italy for dinner. Um, but what happened is that it was a Sunday. Most of the restaurants were closed. I kind of knew that by being in other European countries before, but my brain didn't connect the dots, so I didn't plan anything in advance. And then we spent the evening wandering around the streets of Novara, Italy, trying to find somewhere to eat. And we didn't actually. My son ate at Starve and Burger. My mother-in-law and my husband bought a really disgusting pizza, and I ate some like leftover bread that we have from Croatia, which was very good, with peanut butter and honey. And that was my birthday dinner. So it was just interesting to look at that. Not that that's bad, right? It's just not what I had in my head. It actually ended up being really fun and minus the stressful searching component. But it was really interesting because what I learned, like, there's a reason why I do this at home on my birthday because I can control the variables to some degree.
Uh-huh.
And so I actually said to myself, I don't want to be as much as and like, there's a whole story behind this. I wanted to be in Italy for my 30th birthday. That didn't happen. I was getting divorced, like all of these things. So instead, we went for my 40th birthday. And it was lovely, but then I was like, oh, I wouldn't actually do that again on my birthday because I like to do this on my birthday. And when I don't know enough and haven't asked enough questions about
Right.
the location where I'm going to be, I can't manifest it in the same way. So it was really interesting for me because it also ties into this concept. People talk a lot about manifesting things. And I mean, in my experience, at least this most recent one, that's not possible without asking questions,
Right.
and being empowered to ask questions. And sometimes the questions that you don't even know to ask, which is why it's great to be in community and conversations, because otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have asked that question. And if I had been, maybe I would have learned that this might be difficult to do on Sunday. So maybe don't expect for that to happen. But anyway, that's just one example of the many.
Well, Scott has put into the chat. I love questions to advocate for the autistic community. Although he can't stay for the broadcast, he's going to watch it later. So this is it. It's advocating for the communities that are around us and advocating for our cause and advocating for, ultimately advocating for ourselves to understand why we do what we do. What is the outcome that we're after? How can this happen? And it is only through questions that we can discover not only our preferences, our strengths, and our weaknesses. And when I say weaknesses, I'm not talking about a deficiency. I'm talking about how do we have the capacity to grow unless we do know what our weaknesses are and how we can find somebody that can answer those questions.
Mhm.
And we can't know everything, and that's what this show is about. It's discovering what you don't know, what you don't know.
And I think it's interesting. So we had another one. Hi, Scott. I haven't seen you in forever. We should catch up sometime. But there was this moment on vacation where we were climbing some stairs to go up to some like castle walls, and Nicholas was asking a bunch of questions, and I don't remember the questions that he was asking, but I remember my husband saying like, just get up the stairs. And it was just a really interesting moment because one, I think that's very common. We probably all experience that, and
Of
especially from
course.
a kid to an adult perspective, right? I'm trying to get you to do a thing. Like just eat your breakfast.
Yeah,
Because we're trying to get to the next thing. But it was like such a like moment for me where I was like, whoa, okay, like I don't believe in that, right? Like, yes, I want to get to the top of these stairs, and I want him to feel empowered in asking questions. So there's so often when we're trying to just like get to the next thing and we don't realize how we are stifling the curiosity.
exactly.
And whether that's stifling the curiosity of our children or stifling the curiosity of people around us, or maybe even in a work environment because we're trying to move on to the next thing and we got to get this done today and this is on deadline and blah, blah, blah. There's like so many times where we skip curiosity, and
Mhm.
I don't think it's done intentionally. I think it's kind of happening in the background, but then we build a pattern of stifling curiosity, and then all of a sudden we're in a world where I think, like, quite honestly, we are at where people stopped asking questions,
Yeah.
and
So when
it's
I when I was
dangerous.
little, when I was little, everybody, all parents, when they have their children, they're like waiting for that child to say their first words. It's either going to be, there's a bet going on. Is it going to say mom first, or is he going to say dad first? Mama, papa, daddy. And I said, why?
Of course you did. This is not
And
surprising at
they,
all.
and my mom goes, he said, why? Because I told you so. And I remember when I was young and I was going to school, and I had a teacher that kind of wanted to overpower me. And I went home and I told my mom about the teacher wanting to overpower me. And she said, I want you to know that the only boss that you have is me. Outside of this house, you have no boss. And what I took from that was what my mom was really saying was, you're your nature is going to be formed by the way that you perceive and the way that you ask and what you're asking about, and to be continually inquisitive. And Nicholas, asking, that's his inquisitive mind. And we get programmed, we operate on our programs. So we get programmed not to ask questions. These are the rules that we follow. And I always asked why. And I was involved in a particular religious environment. And one day I asked the question why, and they said that's how we do it. And I said that's not how I do it, and I don't believe that that is a biblical answer. So if that's your answer, I'm going to continue to search. And just a quick backstory: it's why the song that Bono sings, "I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For," is my favorite song. Like that's um, my ex-wife bought me an iPod, okay, when they came out. And the reason that she bought me this particular iPod had the advertisement of Bono on it. And she said, when I saw this, I knew that I had to get this particular iPod for you. So I don't know if he had a deal with Apple or what, but and and the reason is because I'm continuing to search, and Nicholas continuing to search. And obviously it got a little bit challenging.
And I think this is I mean, it's very common from a like child to parent scenario, right? Because you are hoping you can answer your kids' questions. um, but when they're asking really good questions, sometimes you can't. And I always thought, like, I was taught from the time I was very young. My dad's whole thing was just like, use your resources, right? So, like, if I asked a question and he didn't know, then we would go to the encyclopedia, right? And we would go and find out the answer. And so, the way I was taught was just there's not too many questions. There are people who will not appreciate your questions, and that is what it is. But it's not that you have a bad question. Go ask someone else. Go look in a book. And now we have
Right.
a ridiculous amount of access to knowledge and information on the internet that we did not have when I was a kid. And so there's always that. But I think it is also this kind of self pressure on ourselves to be able to answer the questions. And then again, this is why I think it's not intentional that we are creating this wall between us and questions. It's that we want to be able to answer, and we don't have the self confidence to be able to say, no, I don't know. Good
Okay.
question.
So you bring up a great point. And a lot of times, when we're asking questions, we're asking somebody with a limitation. And so that's when I believe that they'll say, well, that's just how we do it. Because their own insecurity is being communicated on
Yeah,
why.
they don't know. I have a really great example of this because I was chatting with this lady and we were having a really great conversation. She was like, "Oh, it sounds like you would be a great fit for this, like a virtual summit or whatever I'm putting in." I'm like, "Yeah, cool, sounds fun." And then she asked me, "How many people are on your email list?" And I was like, "I don't have an email list." Like, that's not how I communicate with my people. And she was like, "Oh, sorry. I can only have people at my summit who have 5,000 people on their email list." And I was like, "Can I ask you something about that?" And she was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Why?" Like, why can you only have people in the summit that have, I mean, like, I have 10, 11,000 followers on LinkedIn, right? Like, I just communicate with my people in a different way. And her answer was, because my coach said so. And I was like, this is terrible. I mean, I didn't say this out loud, but I was like, okay, if that is the way you're doing this, then I'm not interested in participating anyway. But like, for real? My brain was like, really? Like, you don't even have a good reason for you to do that. You're just doing it because someone else told you to do it. And again, it's very common from a parenting perspective, right? Like, do it because I say so. And like, I will never say that. I will never ever, like, I will either I have a good reason for you to do it, right? We need to brush our teeth because otherwise we can't eat food, and we definitely can't have chocolate, because if you're not going to brush your teeth, all you can have is things like carrots and things that self clean your teeth. And then he decides to brush his teeth. But I remember a friend of mine once getting like super frustrated with her daughter because she wouldn't sweep the floor, and she was asking why. She's like, because I said so. And I was like, and my husband said it a couple of times too. It's generally pretty good, but when like the frustration, just do it because I told you to.
Right.
I don't believe in it, and I was lucky enough not to grow up in an environment where it was kind of just like, do this because I say so, which empowered me to never believe that. But like, just because someone told me to do it doesn't mean I have to do it. Like, if you tell me and I'm in alignment with that, then sure, I'll go and do it. And I'll clean my room. I will brush my teeth. I will clean the bathroom, right? But if and I've had even work scenarios where someone has asked me to do a thing and I don't understand why, and I will make them explain it to me until I
Yeah.
have a good reason. Um, Sometime to the degree where they finally realize that they don't have a good reason for doing this either, and no, we really shouldn't do it, even though that thing, this is like actually a real true live work scenario from Tracy. My boss had asked me to do a thing, and I was just like, I don't even remember what the thing was, but I was like, I don't know. I'd like, what's the value in this activity? The activity itself probably would have taken like 5 to 10 minutes to do, but I didn't understand. And my boss spent 45 minutes with me talking about this thing, which we ended up not doing because it didn't have any value. And it's really interesting because from a like time perspective, a lot of people would be like, well, you wasted 35 minutes, right? Like, I could have spent 10 minutes doing the thing, but I spent instead 45 minutes talking about it and understanding. But what people miss in that scenario is, one, how would I have felt if I had to just go and do the thing, right? Like, I'm supposed to be a strategic level team resource. I'm not just here to go and do what you tell me to. I'm here to question things. And because we invested that time together, then we got to like a new level of understanding that was on an ongoing basis more productive for both of us. So I mean, I think that's just another really good demonstration of the power of questions and the reasons why sometimes we skip them, because it might not actually be faster. Actually, I would say in probably most scenarios, it's not
But
faster.
but in that situation, so just because something is faster to just do it, is it more efficient?
Right.
And that's where we ask the question, if we talk about working in corporate world and with other team members, and we go in and we say that we're doing brainstorming. I like to pose the opportunity to do a question storm and to break it down and evaluate through questions. What is the effectiveness? What is the outcome, the desired outcome? And if we start with the end in mind and we start asking the questions going backwards, well, what if this doesn't work?
Mm.
And you found that out on your trip. You discovered that your stomach was starting to rumble about 2:30, and you said, hey, let's go find a good Italian. I mean, we are in Italy, so let's go find the authentic spaghetti. And everybody's closed at 2 o'clock, a half an hour after your stomach starts to rumble. And now, if you would have done that for the 30 days that you were there, I would say that would have been kind of an indication you weren't asking the most effective question. Why
Very
is it?
true.
How come every day I get hungry at 2:30 and I go to the shops and they're all still closed at 2 o'clock? This has been going on for the last week.
Right.
Maybe tomorrow will be different. So insanity is defined by doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome.
Mhm.
But it's the questions that we ask, and the this is where I believe creativity is born.
Mm.
It is through asking questions. What else is possible?
Mm-hmm.
when we do these investigative questions. And I've had where I've worked with people and they're like, oh my gosh, they are, I know I'm going to get fired. I know that I'm going to get fired. And I'm like, why do you know that you're going to get fired? Because I'm getting called into a meeting and they never show up. These people never show up. And I said, well, what else could it mean? Could it mean that you actually are doing a great job? See, we've been programmed to go to the worst. And if we start asking better questions, we have a better outcome because we program our mind. And if we're programmed early on, like Nicholas's age, you say he's 6 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. So he goes to school and he asks questions. And if he has a really, really good teacher and she answers his questions or gives him the opportunity to answer his own question, now she's turning on brain cells that are now firing together and starting to think differently. But if he has a teacher or an educator that says, that's just how we do it, just do it, he grows up thinking that I'm not empowered to ask questions.
Right.
And we have adults that are, that are successful, that are afraid to ask a question to even their team members. And working with CEOs and men and women that are high up in their company and they go to another company, a lateral transfer. Now they start asking, I don't know that I'm good enough. And rather than a statement, it's saying, how are you good?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you strong? And how are you smart? Not how smart am I, but how are you smart? And when we change that directive of the question that we're asking, instead of asking questions like, why does this always happen to me? How could they be so insensitive? And ask a better question. I think that's where the power of what we do, in coaching really allows our clients and people that we work with permission. And how can I help you today? When I get on any calls, and this, I'll say, how are you today?
And he'll make me tell the truth, folks. So if you haven't talked to Sally, he's like, you're lying. How are you really feeling today?
And share, if you don't mind, you don't have to give a specific, but share what permission that allowed.
It allows you to tell yourself the truth.
Yes.
So here's the thing. It's very common societally to quote unquote protect other people from what we're feeling, right? We're going through something tough. We're having a rough day. And someone asks me how I'm doing. And I say, I'm fine. I'm good. Things are fine. But even in that, you hear the fakeness in it, right? You're not fine. Right? There are specific people in your life where you allow that vulnerability, where you just okay, now if I tell Stanley that I'm not fine today, he's gonna be fine with that, and it's gonna be more helpful for me because I'm gonna be able to understand where am I actually, where's my energy level, and how is that going to impact the rest of the day. Maybe can I turn that around? But it's the common practice in society to do that from a I'm protecting other people perspective. Right. But this is something that actually, when we were talking about the questions, Stanley, this makes me think, again, a lot of times when we think about asking questions, we think about that from the external perspective, right? I'm asking someone else a question. And as coaches, we do that a lot. We ask people questions. It's kind of our job. But we forget that when we are the age of Nicholas, and a lot of people I know have experienced this in the education system, and I did as well, where you come across people who don't want you to ask questions. What it does is when you stop asking questions externally, you also stop asking questions internally. Exactly. Our entire practice of asking questions goes down the drain. And a lot of these things, we think it's simple just to ask questions, but asking questions is a skill.
It is a
A
skill.
skill that needs to be practiced. And when we practice asking questions, then we get good at asking questions. But if we don't practice asking questions, we're not good at asking questions. And then we wonder, we've been shut down on our external question asking through the education system. Maybe it's one bad teacher. Hopefully, it's not a stack of bad teachers, which people have been through as well. And then you don't have that capacity or the capability to then do what you said, Stanley, like turn that around and say, why is this always happening to me? What is this leading me towards?
Right.
Right? Like that's a practice. And unless you practice asking questions of that sort, then you don't have a skill asking questions of that sort. So I also think it's important for like people watching this episode today and are like, like, how do you do that, Stan? Like, how do you even know how to take that question and flip it on its head to something that be more empowering? You have to try. You have to practice. And if you haven't practiced today, you're not going to be good at it. You're not going to be good at it. It's not like a light switch and you can just switch it on. You have to practice that skill. So the cool thing about like the Stronger Futures Project or building a community of people around you where you can ask these types of things and you don't have to know the answer and you can just practice asking is so powerful because that's how you build the skill. So then when it comes to something important, when it comes to something that creates sadness, death, or a loss of some kind, then you have the ability to ask the questions in those scenarios by building up your skill over time. And it can be as simple as, I know if you guys have watched this show before, Stanley and I talk a lot about like my gum surgery and some of the advice that Stanley gave me, like really offhand, just because I asked a question. You have the ability to do that. You have the ability to get information from a dental or a medical professional and be like, I don't know. I feel like there might be more I can ask here. Who can I ask? But if you haven't had the practice, then you don't have the confidence. So it starts on day one with deciding, you know what? Maybe I am not where I'd like to be with my
Right.
question asking. And let's go ask some questions.
Yeah, and you know that conversation, that off-topic conversation. You know, one of the things, and I think I might have mentioned to you that you have a great smile, and
I
I
do.
think it was in that, yeah, and I think it was in that there was this, you know, I work on this,
Yep.
and I'm conscious about this, and it was that vulnerability that opened up the statement of, hey, you know, I've got this thing that's going on, and I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute, go back in my library, like that, and I go, oh, well, why don't you put hydrogen peroxide, 2 ounces into your 14 ounces of water in your water pick, turn it up as high as you can without making your gums bleed, and water pick, and do that for a month and tell me what you experience. And then you went to the doctor and you're like, they go, whatever you're doing, don't stop. And okay, so here's the idea. It's the power of asking questions. And even when they seem off, like out of place, they may very well be in the exact place. And the outcome is much greater than you imagined. So who knows what a question and to whom, and it's not age specific. Like when you ask a child, my son, when he was like 3 years old, we had a plastic light type house, and it had a roof on it. He's out there in his briefs, and he's got his plastic hammer and he's beating on the roof. And my wife went out and said, "What are you doing?" And he stopped and he looked at her and he said, "I'm fixing the roof." Duh. And she goes, "Why are you fixing the roof? It's a plastic roof." So because it was leaking, and that's what dad does. So he associated me being on many people's houses doing roofing and doing different things. And he was associating his identity with that. So when she asked him a question, he then in turn responded with a question. Well, it's leaking. Okay. So why wouldn't I
Duh,
be
mom.
thinking this? Yeah. Why wouldn't
But
I be
there's an
thinking?
interesting point in there too, and I know we're wrapping up right away, but there's when we're kids, someone asks us a question and we're just like, I'm fixing the roof.
Right.
Why? Because it's leaking.
Right.
Right? We don't take the question as offense. Right?
Yeah.
And I see this very often in, and I've experienced it in parts of my life too. I remember once, like, I was making I was making scones, and we had two different kinds of eggs. And someone asked me like, why are you using those eggs? And in my experience of it was, why are you using those eggs? Like I was being scolded for using that type of eggs. Whereas in reality, that wasn't a thing. That was a me thing that turned that question into an attack. And so then when we are in that mindset of being attacked, then questions can seem like we want to avoid them. We want to avoid them. But when we step back and we take the 3-year-old perspective, and someone's asking like, "Why did you use those eggs?" And we're like, "Because I love these eggs," or "Because these eggs were at the front of the fridge."
Right.
Right? Like you just give your reason, and you're not like so concerned that your reason is going to be bad or wrong or any of those things. You just answer a question. So it's a cool activity that people could take away, is just to look at, like, when you're being asked a question, is it just a question anymore, or are you giving it more meaning than perhaps it has? And what if you
Exactly.
didn't?
Yeah. Yeah. The quality of our life is really, around a few different things. It's the quality of our relationships. It's the quality of the food that we're eating, and it's the quality of our questions. If we're asking and we internalize those questions. So, I'm going to put a very humble plug in here. If you have questions and you want to go deeper and you want to know who you are even more, you want to know more about marketing and business and that, get a hold of Tracy. She's going to be your go-to person for that. If you want to know more about your mindset and the quality of your questions, and you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can book a call with me, a virtual coffee. It's complimentary, and spend 30 minutes with me and ask some questions, or ask yourself the questions and just vocalize them, bring them to the front and center, and maybe, just maybe, you could create a life beyond limitations and expand your imagination and open your creativity. So with that, thank you for joining us today. I know Tracy's got a prior engagement, and thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting with you again. I'm glad to have you back, and I'm glad that you enjoyed your vacation and you got a lot of questions.
Oh, all the questions all the time, and I love it. And if you happen to be watching the replay, if you have a question, put it in the chat. Put it in the
Exactly.
chat, tag us, we'll come back and answer it. Or we might even do an episode specifically on that if your question is amazing.
Exactly. Yep. Sounds fantastic. All
All
right.
right.
Have an outstanding week, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Stanley. Thanks, everyone.